Cecil was staying with his grandpa, which was Tommy Wilson. Uh, Most of our people have heard of Tommy Wilson. He was a wonderful man of God, and right before bedtime, Cecil went out to the barn to pray, and I guess he stayed longer than his grandpa thought he should, and he went out to check on him. And when he went in, Cecil was like he was praying, and it was in another tongue. And when his grandpa come in and saw what he was doing, the Spirit of the Lord just come over him, and he started doing the same thing. And Cecil said it was just like, he said it was kind of like, he called it a butter bean, like was a little object on his tongue. And he said when I would start talking in another tongue, and he said it like that passed from me to my grandpa. And he said he'd take that up and he'd start talking in tongues, and just like he'd send it back to Cecil. And it went back and forth like that for a pretty good while, just the Spirit of the Lord working between the two. And that's the first time, I guess, that the Lord had ever used Cecil in that way. And Cecil's grandpa, they tell me, of course, I knew him in later years, and I loved him. He was a precious old man. But at one time, I guess, they said that he was really filled with the Holy Ghost. And there was another preacher, Neil or Randolph, they called him, and he was sick, and he was in a bed sick. And Cecil's grandpa went to see him, and he was laying there with his eyes closed, and Cecil's grandpa got water and took a teaspoon and would drop it into his mouth, and that other preacher's tongue would come out to get that drop of water, and he was healed. When Cecil's grandpa, and of course I'm putting more on there than he asked for.
That's okay, he won't mind at all.
But he was just a Holy Ghost filled man. And when the Lord first started working with him, people thought he was crazy. And some men came to bind him up, tie him up, and take him, I don't know, maybe try to take him to the asylum or something. And they didn't realize that it was just the power of the Lord that did all these things. And when they come to bind him, tie him up, he just went walking backwards across the porch. And it was up high. But when he got to the edge, he just kept walking. He didn't fall off or nothing. He just kept walking. And the Lord took care of him. They saw that there was something besides a mental problem. And the Lord told him to build a pond. And he was really sick at that time. And the Lord told him to build a pond and go out and get in the pond. And they had, like they called a spout, coming in from the spring and coming down into that pond. And he told him, he said, build a pond and just use one hand. Use your right hand to build that pond. And he said, he was building, piling the rocks, and he said he come to a pretty heavy rock, and he just reached with his left hand and touched that to try to support it, and the Lord said it won't work, and he had to tear it out and redo it, and he said he felt like he just laid down then in the pond on his back and let the water from that spout that was coming from the spring, let the water run down his mouth, and when it'd go down, then it would come back up. All that uh, infection and stuff, it would just pour back out, and the water would come back in, and it washed out everything. All that infection, everything was in his stomach, and the Lord healed him. He healed him. Uh, that was just, I guess, sort of in the beginning of his ministry, but he had a lot of power with the Lord.
Who did you say that was?
That was Cecil's grandpa,
Okay.
Tommy Wilson.
Wow.
I'm sorry, my mouth gets so dry.
You're okay.